The impossible flight of Bruce Carr. The Mustang inverts and drops into the freezing Czechoslovakian sky. At 8,000 feet, a jolt, a violent bloom of silk. The parachute deploys, snatching him from a 400-mile-per-hour plummet into a swaying, vulnerable descent. The roar of the dying Rolls-Royce Merlin engine fades, replaced by an eerie, wind-whipped silence. Below him, enemy territory stretches to every horizon, a quilt of frozen fields, dark forests, and distant smoking villages. He is utterly alone, 200 miles behind the jagged teeth of the German front lines. His inventory, a torn flight suit, a Mae West life preserver, a .45 caliber pistol with 7 rounds, a broken escape map, and the crushing certainty of capture. No radio, no food, no water. It is November 2nd, 1944, in Central Europe. The temperature is dropping like a stone, soon to be far below freezing. The mathematics of survival, as briefed by intelligence officers in warm, safe huts in England, are brutal and unequivocal. American pilots shot down over occupied territory have a 23% chance of evading capture and returning to Allied lines. The other 77% spend the remainder of the war behind the barbed wire of Stalag Luft 3, or are buried in unmarked graves by farmers, or are executed by vengeful SS or Gestapo units. The odds are not in his favor. They are a sentence. Bruce Carr, a 20-year-old first lieutenant from the 354th Fighter Group, is dangling beneath that silk canopy, about to become the exception to every statistic, the outlier on every graph, the living rebuke to probability itself. Because in 4 days, he will not merely evade the largest manhunt in military history. He will not simply outsmart the German patrols scouring the woods for him. He will perform an act of such breathtaking audacity that it would be dismissed as pulp fiction had it not been meticulously documented, witnessed, and sworn to by scores of men. He will walk directly into the heart of a German airbase. He will climb into the cockpit of a Focke-Wulf FW-190, one of the deadliest fighter aircraft in the world, known to Allied pilots as the Butcher Bird. He will teach himself to fly it, deciphering a dashboard written in a language he does not speak by the faint glow of a retreating moon. And then, with the dawn at his back and every gun in Europe seeking to kill him, he will steal it. He will fly this stolen weapon of war 200 miles back to his own airfield, completing a journey that begins with a parachute and ends with a belly landing in a storm of mud and disbelief, having turned certain capture into legendary escape. This is not just a war story. It is a masterclass in desperate ingenuity, a testament to a mind that viewed impossibility not as a wall, but as a door waiting to be kicked in. It is the story of Bruce Carr. Part 1. The Making of an Unconventional Mind. Bruce Ward Carr entered the world on January 28, 1924, in the small, unassuming town of Union Springs, nestled in the Finger Lakes region of New York. His childhood was that of a typical Depression-era farm kid, hard work, simple pleasures, and horizons defined by the edges of the family land. There was, however, one spark of deviation, one anomaly that would alter the trajectory of his life and ultimately of military aviation history. At the age of 15, in the fateful year of 1939, Bruce Carr learned to fly. The year is critical. In September 1939, as Carr was mastering his first takeoffs and landings over upstate New York, German panzer divisions were crashing across the Polish border. The world was plunging into a war that would be decided, in no small part, in the skies. A 15-year-old farm boy could not have known that within 4 years he would be dogfighting meshmechs over Berlin, but some deep intrinsic part of him, a part that thrived on mechanics, control, and the physics of three-dimensional movement, must have sensed that the skill of flight was about to become the most vital currency a young man could possess. His training was gloriously informal, devoid of military rigidity. A local crop duster and barnstormer named Earl, recognizing a kindred spirit and a pair of steady hands, let the teenager take the controls of his old fabric-covered biplane. There was no manual, just the visceral language of stick and rudder, throttle and horizon. One summer afternoon, feeling the aircraft become an extension of his own will, Carr was irrevocably hooked. By the time he turned 16, he had accumulated more flight time than most cadets entering the Army Air Force's official training programs. He didn't just understand flying, he felt it in his bones. When the United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor, Carr's path was preordained. On September 3, 1942, he enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces. The bureaucratic machinery of war processed him, but it could not standardize him. At the Aviation Cadet Training Program, a delightful piece of symmetry occurred. His assigned instructor turned out to be Earl, his old mentor from the New York fields, who had also traded crop dusting for the uniform. Earl took one look at Carr's application, saw the 240 flight hours already logged, and scrawled a recommendation for the accelerated program. The system, for once, worked perfectly for a mind that operated outside its norms. The transformation was rapid. By August 1943, Carr was a flight officer. By February 1944, he was in England, assigned to the 380th Fighter Stratum, 363rd Fighter Group of the 9th Air Force. His weapon was the P-51 Mustang, and it was love at first flight. The Mustang, the sword of the 8th. To understand Carr's world, one must understand the P-51. It was not merely an aircraft, it was a war-winning weapon, the mathematical solution to a horrific equation. Before its arrival in significant numbers, the United States daylight bombing campaign over Europe was a bloodletting. Without fighter escort, the lumbering B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators were sitting ducks for the agile, deadly interceptors of the Luftwaffe. The 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers, 600 men, in a single mission over Schweinfurt in October 1933. The campaign was becoming unsustainable. The P-51 Mustang, particularly the D model with the game-changing bubble canopy, changed everything. Its genius lay in a beautiful marriage of an American airframe and a British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The numbers told the story. A range of over 1,650 miles with external drop tanks, enabling it to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. A top speed of 437 miles per hour. A service ceiling of 41,900 feet. Armed with 6.5 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, it could shred German aircraft with a 2-second burst. For the first time, the bombers had guardians for the entire journey. The Luftwaffe's lethal advantage was shattered. German pilots, who had once preyed with impunity, now faced a relentless long-range nemesis they dubbed Die Langnasen Bastarde, the long-nosed bastards. The Mustang didn't just contend the skies, it conquered them, bleeding the Luftwaffe of its irreplaceable veteran pilots. Carr fell for the Mustang completely. The cockpit fit him like a glove. The controls were telepathically responsive. The surge of the Merlin engine was pure intoxication. He named his personal aircraft Angel's Playmate, a deceptively gentle moniker for a machine of war. He could not imagine that in just 8 months he would be sitting in a very different cockpit, one lined with German script and crowned with a swastika on the tail fin. The landing gear would not come down. He pulled the lever he had used to retract it. Nothing. He pumped it frantically. Nothing. He scanned the nightmare dashboard for an emergency release, a backup system, any other lever or switch. In his pre-dawn familiarization, he had missed a critical detail. The FW-190's landing gear used a hydraulic system with a selector valve that directed pressure to either retract or extend. Carr had been pulling the retraction lever. He didn't know the separate procedure to command down. Below him, the gunners of the 354th were readying their 40mm Bofors guns. A German fighter, bold as brass, was lining up to strafe their field. They were about to blow their own returning hero out of the sky. Decision time, again. Carr cut the throttle, lowered the flaps, a lever he had figured out, and aimed for the grassy verge beside the main runway. A belly landing was his only option. The FW-190 settled, its weight sinking toward the earth. 100 feet, 50, 20. The aircraft hit the frozen French turf at 90 miles per hour. A deafening, grinding shriek of tearing metal filled the world as the FW-190 slid for 300 yards, throwing up a gigantic rooster tail of mud, grass, and shattered components. It ground to a shuddering, twisted halt just off the runway. Silence for a heartbeat. Then movement. Within seconds, the wreck was surrounded by jeeps and military policemen, their M1 carbines and Thompson submachine guns trained directly on the cockpit. They were expecting to take a German pilot prisoner. The canopy, scratched and muddy, slid back. A figure emerged, clad in a torn, oil-stained flight suit. He was gaunt, pale, and smeared with grime. He climbed unsteadily onto the ruined wing. An MP sergeant yelled, "Hände hoch! Raus! Schnell!" Hands up! Out! Fast! The figure on the wing stared back, exhaustion and defiance in equal measure. In a voice rough with cold and fatigue, he replied, "I'm Captain Bruce Carr of this goddamn squadron. Now put those goddamn guns down." No one moved. No one believed him. Captain Carr had been missing for 4 days. He was presumed dead or captured. This was a German trick. The MPs kept their weapons leveled, fingers on triggers, until a command car screeched to a halt nearby. Out stepped Colonel George Bickle, the commanding officer of the 354th Fighter Group. He marched through the ring of MPs, his eyes taking in the surreal scene. The wrecked, pristine FW-190, the mud-spattered pilot, the utterly bewildered guards. He looked up at Carr, his face a mask of incredulity. He uttered the line that would become immortal in squadron lore. "Carr, where in the hell have you been, and what in the hell have you been doing now?" The legend of Bruce Carr, the man who stole an FW-190, was born in that moment. Part 5. The Unfinished War. Ace in a Day. The story rocketed through the Allied forces. It was too good, too cinematic to be anything but true. The pilot who had turned a death sentence into a grand theft auto of the skies. But for Carr, the war was not a story. It was a job, and it wasn't finished. He was given a brief leave, a new Mustang, which he also named Angel's Playmate, and sent back into the fray. His aggressive brilliance only intensified, and on April 2nd, 1945, with the Third Reich in its death throes, he authored the final breathtaking chapter of his European combat career. Leading a flight of 4 P-51s on a reconnaissance mission near Schweinfurt, Carr spotted something that made his blood run cold, then hot. High above them, stacked between 18,000 and 25,000 feet, was the largest formation of German aircraft he had ever seen. A massive swarm of 60 or more fighters, a mix of the latest Bf-109 G-10s and FW-190 D-9 long-nose variants. It was a last gasp assembly of Luftwaffe power. The tactical reality was stark, mathematical suicide. 4 against 60. The Germans held every advantage: altitude, numbers, and position. Every rule of aerial combat, every fragment of common sense screamed the same command: disengage, climb to a safe distance, report the formation's heading and size, let the heavy bomber escort groups handle it. Bruce Carr's mind had never been particularly interested in common sense. He keyed his radio, his voice calm, engaging. His 3 wingmen, veterans who had flown with him through hell, didn't question it. When Carr said engaging, you engaged. The 4 Mustangs turned and climbed straight into the heart of the German armada. What followed was not a dogfight. It was a masterful ambush, predicated on sheer, shocking audacity. The German pilots were in a loose cruise formation, likely en route to intercept a bomber stream. The last thing they expected was a tiny quartet of Americans climbing into their midst from below. Carr used the chaos as his weapon. He slid into the rear of the formation, becoming a wolf among confused sheep. He picked a target, a Bf-109, closed to point-blank range, and fired. The 109 exploded. He shifted immediately to an FW-190, his gun stitching a line of .50 caliber fire into its cockpit and engine. It rolled over and plunged earthward. The German formation, leaderless and startled, began to disintegrate. They didn't know how many attackers there were. In the swirling confusion, Carr moved with lethal precision. 3rd kill, 4th kill, 5th kill. In the span of approximately 3 minutes, First Lieutenant Bruce Carr shot down 5 German aircraft. His wingmen, empowered by his lead, accounted for 10 more. 4 Americans, 15 German aircraft destroyed, 0 American losses. It was one of the most lopsided, stunning victories of the air war. When their ammunition was exhausted, Carr calmly led his flight away from the scattered, demoralized enemy and back to base. For this action, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's 2nd highest award for valor. The citation hailed his complete disregard for his personal safety and conspicuous gallantry. He was credited as the last ace in a day in the European theater. No American pilot would match the feat of 5 kills in a single mission before Germany surrendered. By war's end, he had flown 172 combat missions and was credited with between 14 and 15 confirmed aerial victories, records vary, plus numerous ground kills. He was 21 years old. Part 3. The Butcherbird's New Pilot. He waited until 3 a.m., the coldest, deepest part of the night. The airfield was quiet, patrolled only by a skeleton crew. No one was near the revetment. The 80 yards of open ground between the tree line and the aircraft might as well have been 8 miles. If a sentry glanced his way, it was over. Carr moved. Hunched over, ignoring the searing pain in his ankle, he covered the distance in under a minute, his breath pluming in the frigid air. He reached the cool, dappled metal of the FW-190's fuselage. The aircraft was imposing up close, larger and heavier than his sleek Mustang, a brutish, purposeful machine. The cockpit sat high off the ground. He pulled himself onto the wing root, found the canopy release, and slid the heavy glass canopy back. He dropped into the pilot's seat. The first impression was one of claustrophobic complexity. The cockpit was smaller, tighter than the P-51's. His knees pressed against the instrument panel. The second impression was utter incomprehension. Every gauge, every switch, every lever was labeled in stark black German. Drehzahlmesser, tachometer, Funkgerät, radio, Bombenwurfhebel, bomb release. It was a wall of hieroglyphics. He had roughly 4 hours until first light. He used every minute. Working by touch and faint moonlight filtering through the canopy, he began a systematic process of deduction. The control stick fell naturally to his right hand. The throttle quadrant was on the left side, familiar territory. He traced wiring bundles with his fingers. He identified gauges by their position and typical layout. Airspeed indicator top left, altimeter top center, engine temperature and pressure on the right. He found the fuel selector. He found what he believed were the magneto switches. He found the propeller pitch control. The starter was the critical mystery. On the right side of the cockpit, his hand closed around a prominent T-shaped handle. The associated text looked vaguely like Anlasser, starter. He pulled it. Nothing. He pushed it. A high-pitched mechanical whine suddenly filled the cockpit. An inertia starter, a flywheel system common on German aircraft, was winding up, building rotational energy. He let it spin for a full 20 seconds, the sound screaming in the silent night. Then he pulled the T-handle back. The result was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The 14-cylinder BMW 801 radial engine coughed once, belched a cloud of blue smoke, and then exploded into a thunderous, earth-shaking roar. 1,700 horsepower at idle sounded like the world tearing apart. In the dead of night, the noise was a beacon. Every German on the base would have heard it. Carr's margin for error had just collapsed to 0. There was no time for a taxi check, no time to find the brakes or the runway. He shoved the throttle forward. The FW-190 lurched out of the revetment, its tail coming up quickly. The aircraft was nose-heavy, eager to fly. Through the darkness, he aimed the nose between two looming hangars, a narrow alley to the sky. Figures were emerging from buildings, shouting, pointing flashlights. He felt the acceleration press him back into the seat. 60 miles an hour, 70. The hangar walls rushed at him. At 90 miles an hour, he hauled back on the stick. The butcherbird leapt into the air, its landing gear clearing the hangar roofs by what felt like inches. He was airborne, in a stolen German fighter, behind enemy lines. The impossible had been achieved. Now came the hard part, staying alive. Part 4. The Hedge-Hopping Gauntlet. Climbing into the pre-dawn gloom, Carr's mind raced faster than the BMW engine. He needed to get the landing gear up. His hand fumbled over the left console, found a likely lever, and pulled. A solid thunk vibrated through the airframe as the wheels retracted. Good. Speed built rapidly. He identified the gyro compass, its needle now his only reliable guide. He oriented it west-southwest, toward France, toward home. Altitude was a trap. At 5,000 feet, he'd be a clear target for German radar, flak batteries, and roaming fighters. The solution was to become a shadow. He pushed the stick forward, descending until he was skimming the treetops at barely 50 feet, holding a blistering 280 miles per hour. The Czechoslovakian landscape became a green-brown blur beneath his wings. This was insane, nerve-shredding flying. A momentary lapse, a stray tree, a sudden hill, and he would be a fireball. But at this altitude, he was invisible. He was below most radar horizons, too low for effective anti-aircraft fire, and too fast for any infantrymen to draw a bead. For 45 minutes, he flew like a possessed ghost, the rising sun at his back, painting the world in long, stark shadows. He crossed from Czechoslovakia into the scarred, contested lands of eastern France, the evidence of war becoming more frequent: burned-out tanks, cratered fields, abandoned trenches. Then he crossed the front lines, and his problems multiplied exponentially. Allied anti-aircraft gunners were conditioned by months of war. They saw what they expected to see, the distinctive radial engine silhouette of an FW-190, a German fighter, flying low and fast toward Allied positions. It was a target, a threat. The sky around Bruce Carr erupted. From foxholes, from truck-mounted quad 50 calibers, from fixed emplacements, streams of tracers arced toward him, stitching the air with deadly fireworks. He was taking fire from his own side. He had no IFF, identification, friend or foe, transponder. He had no radio to scream, "I'm friendly, don't shoot." The FW-190 still wore its full German regalia, the black crosses on the wings, the swastika on the tail. He was the perfect enemy. There was only one response: go lower, go faster. He dropped the nose until he was hedge-hopping at a suicidal 20 feet, the propeller wash whipping dust from country roads, flattening grass in fields. French civilians dove into ditches as the snarling German fighter screamed overhead. American GIs, seeing the distinctive shape, fired rifles and machine guns at him in a spontaneous, chaotic barrage. Carr later estimated with grim humor that every 50 caliber machine gun in France took a shot at me during that final, desperate sprint. The FW-190 was hit. He heard the thwack-thwack of rounds impacting the airframe, felt the aircraft shudder and vibrate. But the FW-190 was built tough, a robust war machine, and it held together. The engine never missed a beat. Ahead, through the haze of smoke and adrenaline, he saw a familiar pattern of runways and dispersals. A-66, the airfield at Conté, France, home of the 354th Fighter Group. Relief washed over him, instantly followed by a new wave of terror. The anti-aircraft crews around his own base were now tracking him, their guns swiveling to follow the incoming bandit. He lined up for a straight-in approach. There was no time for a standard landing pattern, no time for radio calls. He had to get on the ground now. That's when he discovered the final cruel flaw in his magnificent plan.
His combat career began with a signature act of aggression that foreshadowed everything to come. On March 8, 1944, Carr spotted a Messerschmitt Bf-109 over Germany and gave chase. The German pilot, seeking escape, dove for the deck, skimming the treetops at over 400 miles per hour. Carr followed, a relentless shadow. For 40 miles, they raced across the German landscape, their propellers nearly clipping the pines. Carr fired and missed. He fired again. A single .50 caliber round clipped the 109's left wing. The German pilot, in a panic, pulled up and ejected, but he was too low. His parachute streamed, failing to fully deploy. The pilot was killed on impact. His aircraft plowed into a hillside. Carr returned to base, expecting congratulations for tenacity. Instead, his commanding officer summoned him. "Carr," he said, "that was the most over-aggressive, reckless flying I have ever witnessed. You nearly killed yourself for one kill." The victory was disallowed. Technically, Carr hadn't shot the plane down. The pilot had killed himself trying to escape. Carr was transferred. It was the first clear indication that Bruce Carr's mind operated on a different wavelength. Where the command structure saw reckless disregard for procedure, Carr saw a logical conclusion: pursue the enemy until he is destroyed, regardless of the altitude or the risk. It was a mindset that viewed the rulebook as a list of suggestions and the limits of an aircraft as challenges to be tested. This mindset would soon be the only thing standing between him and a German POW camp. Ace among the pioneers. The transfer, in a twist of fate, placed him exactly where he belonged, with the 353rd Fighter Squadron, 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group. These were the first pilots to fly the P-51 in combat in Europe, the absolute best of the best. Here, his aggression was not punished, but honed. He fit right in. On June 17, 1944, 11 days after D-Day, he scored his first official kill, sharing credit for a Focke-Wulf FW-190 destroyed over Normandy. The victories began to accumulate. On September 12th, his flight strafed a German airfield, destroying Junkers U-88 bombers on the ground. On the return leg, they spotted 30 Focke-Wulf FW-190s flying 2,000 feet below. Without hesitation, Carr dove into the swarm. In 3 minutes of chaotic combat, he shot down 3 German fighters. When his wingman took damage, Carr immediately broke off his attack to shepherd the damaged Mustang all the way back to friendly territory, an act of loyalty that earned him the Silver Star. By October 29, 1944, his tally stood at 7.5 confirmed kills. He was officially an ace. 4 days later, on November 2nd, the pendulum of war swung back.
During a low-level strafing run on a Luftwaffe airfield in Czechoslovakia, ground fire found its mark. Carr's Mustang, Angel's playmate, was hit. Smoke filled the cockpit. The controls went slack. The phrase, bail out, crackled in his head, whether from his own voice or a phantom memory of training he never knew. He inverted the stricken aircraft and dropped into the void. Part 2. The Calculus of Survival. The landing was brutal. The frozen, uneven ground of the Czechoslovakian forest twisted his ankle on impact with a sickening crunch. Not broken, but badly sprained, a throbbing, fiery handicap. For a moment he lay in the silence, the immense weight of his situation settling upon him. He was behind enemy lines, injured and alone. The first order of business was to vanish. He gathered the billowing silk of his parachute, dragged it into a thicket, and buried it under a mound of leaves and dirt. The Germans would send patrols. They always did. He had maybe 20 minutes. Standard escape and evasion doctrine was clear. Put as much distance as possible between yourself and the crash site, then move west or south toward the advancing Allied armies. It was logical, linear, and exactly what the enemy expected. Bruce Carr did not think in straight lines. Lying in the dirt, his mind, the same mind that chased a 109 into the treetops, began running a new set of calculations. He knew the airfield he had been attacking was roughly 5 miles to the north. He knew the Germans would fan their search outward from his landing site, assuming he was fleeing away from them. To move towards the Allies meant days, possibly weeks of travel across hundreds of miles of hostile territory on a bad ankle with no supplies. The mathematics of that path led almost certainly to capture or death. Then came the counterintuitive spark. What if he moved towards the enemy, not to surrender immediately, but to use their own infrastructure against them? The airfield would have food, water, maybe a weapon he could steal, and most critically, it was the last place they would look for him. It was a move of such profound psychological reversal that it bordered on tactical genius. His survival, he concluded, depended on doing the completely unexpected. He oriented himself and began limping north into the teeth of the German defenses. The frozen forest. The next 3 days were a grinding odyssey of cold, pain, and hunger. He moved only at night, using the stars to navigate, his flight suit offering scant protection against the deepening November freeze. His ankle screamed with every step. He avoided roads, villages, and even animal trails, melting into the shadowy skeletal forest. On the second day, he found a half-frozen stream and drank greedily, the water so cold it burned his throat and numbed his stomach. Moments later, he spotted a German patrol with dogs less than 200 yards away. He dropped into a drainage ditch and lay motionless, his face in the mud for 2 hours as they passed within earshot. By the third day, the hunger became a palpable, hollow presence. The human body, under extreme stress and cold, can burn 4,000 calories a day. Carr had consumed exactly 0. His body began cannibalizing itself, consuming muscle tissue for energy. Weakness set in, accompanied by a fog of dizziness. The plan to use the airfield as a resupply point was fading. A new, grim calculation took hold: surrender. But not just to anyone. Aviators had a code, an unspoken respect between knights of the air. The Luftwaffe, particularly its flying personnel, was known to treat captured Allied pilots with a degree of professionalism, especially compared to the SS or the Gestapo. Stalag Luft 3, while a prison, offered Red Cross packages, regular meals, and the chance of survival. It was the rational choice, the safe choice. He would surrender at the airfield. On the fourth day, late in the afternoon, Carr reached the tree line overlooking the German base. Exhausted, shivering, and starving, he crouched in the undergrowth. Through the bare branches, he could see the layout: hangars, fuel trucks, parked aircraft, mostly Junkers transports, but also a few Messerschmitt Bf 109s. He would wait for dawn, then walk to the main gate with his hands raised. As dusk fell, however, his eye was drawn to a specific point on the perimeter. About 80 yards from his position was a camouflaged revetment, a reinforced earthen bunker meant to protect aircraft from bomb blasts. Inside, partially covered by netting, was an FW-190, and it was being serviced. Two German mechanics, working under portable lights in the gathering gloom, were performing what looked like a thorough pre-flight inspection. They checked the fuel tanks, topping them off. They climbed into the cockpit, and moments later the air was torn by the distinctive, thunderous bark of the Focke-Wulf BMW 801 radial engine, roaring to life. The sound was raw power, a 1,700 horsepower symphony that echoed off the hangars. They ran the engine up, cycled the propeller, checked the magnetos, then they shut it down, covered the cockpit with a canvas tarp, and walked back toward the main buildings, their work done. The FW-190 was armed, fueled, and flight-ready. It was also, for the moment, unguarded. In that instant, Bruce Carr's surrender plan evaporated, incinerated by a new and dazzling possibility. His brain, starving for calories but rich in audacity, began processing a new set of variables. He had never flown a German aircraft. He didn't speak German. He had no idea where the controls were, how to start the complex engine, or how to operate the landing gear. The cockpit would be a labyrinth of alien switches and Gothic script. But he knew how to fly. He had 500 combat hours. Every aircraft in the world had a throttle, a stick, and rudder pedals. The fundamental physics of lift, thrust, and control did not change because the labels were in German. And sitting before him was a fully fueled, operational fighter aircraft, a ticket home that didn't involve a prison wire. The decision was made. He would steal it.
Part 6. A lifetime at the edge of the sky. For Bruce Carr, the end of World War II was not an end, but an intermission. The kid who had fallen in love with flight in 1939 made it his life's work. He stayed in the newly formed United States Air Force. He joined the Acrojets, the USAF's first jet aerobatic demonstration team, thrilling crowds in F-80 shooting stars. When war erupted in Korea, he was there, flying 57 combat missions in the sleek, swept-wing F-86 Sabre with the 336th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, eventually commanding the squadron from 1955 to 1956. The farm boy from New York was now a lieutenant colonel leading men in the jet age. And when America's focus shifted to Southeast Asia, so did Carr. At 44 years old, now a full colonel, he flew 286 combat missions in Vietnam in the F-100 Super Sabre, conducting close air support and bombing runs in a conflict vastly different from the one over Europe, yet governed by the same brutal physics of flight and survival. 3 wars, 3 generations of aircraft, propeller, jet, supersonic jet. 505 total combat missions, a career that spanned the entirety of modern aerial warfare. He retired in 1973, his uniform heavy with ribbons, the Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross with clusters, Air Medal with clusters, Purple Heart. The final landing. On April 25, 1998, Colonel Bruce Ward Carr died of prostate cancer in St. Cloud, Florida. He was 74 years old. He was buried with full military honors in Section 64, Grave 6922 of Arlington National Cemetery, his final resting place among the heroes of American history. His government-issued headstone is a model of official brevity. It lists his rank, his name, his branch of service, his wars, and his major decorations. It is a dignified stone summary of a life of duty. It does not and could not contain the real story. It doesn't mention the 4 days in a Czechoslovakian forest. It doesn't mention the stolen Focke-Wulf FW-190, the belly landing in a storm of mud, the MPs with their trembling triggers, and Colonel Bickle's immortal question.
It doesn't capture the sight of a 73-year-old man, 1 year before his death, at the controls of a P-51D at an air show, throwing the vintage fighter through aggressive, low-level maneuvers that defied time and age. When a spectator asked him afterward what he was thinking during the flight, the old pilot just shrugged. "Same thing I was always thinking. What's the airplane capable of? What am I capable of? Let's find out." That is the essence of the Bruce Carr story. It is not merely a tale of a stolen aircraft or a high score of kills. It is the story of a specific type of mind, a mind that when presented with a closed door does not seek a window. It calculates the tensile strength of the hinges, estimates the force required, and then kicks the damn thing down. It is a mind that looks at a 23% chance of survival and sees not a probability, but a challenge. It looks at a cockpit full of German writing and sees not a barrier, but a puzzle to be solved in real time, at gunpoint. In November 1944, a downed pilot made a choice that defied all rationality, all doctrine, and all odds. He chose not to evade or surrender, but to attack his predicament from within. He turned his captor's weapon into his own salvation. It was an act of pure, unadulterated agency in a situation designed to strip it all away. The story of Bruce Carr is a permanent reminder that in the calculus of war and life, the most important variable is not the equipment, the odds, or the rules. It is the relentless, questioning, unconquerable human spirit that looks at impossibility and asks, quietly or with a roar, "What else can I do?" And then, like a Mustang inverted against a frozen sky, it proceeds to do it.